Welcome back to another episode of the David Augustine podcast. Today I have one of my good friends who lives out in Winnipeg now, Marie Gomez, on. How have you been, and what's life been like out in Winnipeg?
Thanks, first of all, for having me, David. I really appreciate being on your podcast. It's always fun to talk with you. And I've been out here now for a year, which is so crazy to think about because I feel like time has just flown by and I've been working and I've been living on my own. So it's been a really big, I guess, like life experience for me. And I just really enjoy being able to like do the job that I worked to study and to try to do, and like I've really learned a lot while I've been here.
And because you work at City News, and what's that been like? What kind of stories have you covered? What's been eventful out there for you?
Well, I mean, it's really interesting because the job that I do, I'm a video journalist. So you're really doing everything. Like the day to day can be a little hectic, but some days it's also like you get used to the flow, so it can also be pretty normal. But essentially, I go in with like a story pitch, and like every day is so different. And because we're a small team, we cover everything. Like you don't really have a beat at this station. You kind of just cover what is happening on that day. And like there's only ever like three or four of us on a single day. So we'll cover that many stories. And then on top of that, we'll like write voiceovers if we can't, manage to put it into a story. So I've literally covered everything from homicides, like some of the most tragic events have been recently even have been like teenage murders, like even like yesterday we had a child that was murdered, and like I don't want to start off so heavy, but I've
Yeah.
also done like really really happy stories, like people who are going back and doing things in their lives that they love, or who are just doing things for their community. Like I did a story with one girl who was starting like a petition because her sibling needed special care at school, and they were threatening to get rid of that funding. And so I actually ended up in a little bit of a niche myself, just doing a lot of education stories because it's been such a big topic in Manitoba over the past year. But I also, yeah, I try to find stories that are happy, so that because there's always going to be something that's going on that might not be positive, we kind of want to offset that, at least, find people's stories that are actually bringing joy to their community, or like, positive things. There's just always news has something bad going on. So we gotta like lighten up the world a bit.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the pandemic going on, it's just all COVID. Every time you turn on the news, something new about the different variants that we have now. I noticed, and I was talking to you about this, with the Winnipeg Jets came
Oh,
into your
yes.
life,
Yeah.
and you became a little sports fan for a little bit.
Yeah, this is actually one thing that I was not expecting. So you asked me what kind of stories I've covered, and a lot of them have been sports. Just again, because we kind of have to cover whatever is going on that day. We've had from last summer the CFL canceling their season or possibly having a new season. They were kind of
Hmm.
going back and forth. Then NHL. I was gonna say the NFL. We don't have that here, but it's been a wild ride for me because I'm not a sports person. And I mean, I like to play sports. I like to participate in fitness activities, but I'm generally not one that follows sports. So um, it's really been interesting to get into the, I don't want to call it the bandwagon, but like it's really like the environment that
Yeah.
everyone is in. Feel swept into it because there's nothing more exciting than like feeling the vibe of a group of people who are cheering for the same thing, whether it's cheering for us to go and get vaccines, or if it's cheering for us to have our team win a hockey game. And like the first and see, I still struggle with the terms a little bit, but the first round of the NHL playoffs where the Jets actually swept the Edmonton Oilers was huge. Like everyone was so excited. Like it was just unbelievable how much energy there was, and I can't even imagine what it's like on a regular year because I think Winnipeg is just one of those cities that always has something for their team. And so when the Bombers won in 2019, I know they had huge parties, and I know they have whiteout parties for the NHL games as well. So like it's really something exciting to see again people just group together. And the other day I covered a story of the first game where they were allowing fans back in the stands. It was a soccer game, and like people were just excited to be together. I think that's really what sports is about, and what I've learned. Because I mean, I'll be honest, I think I used to be a little bit judgmental towards just like sports and people who play sports, because I never really understood it myself. Like I played sports in high school, but to play it professionally where you're getting so much money and like people are so into it, I never quite understood that. But like I think it's that community sense of like we're in this together that people really want and that they buy into when they watch sports.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because going back to what you said, the Jets sweeping the Oilers, as like a hockey fan who's like watched hockey over the last couple of years, gotten more into it. Because the Oilers have two like awesome players, McDavid and Draisaitl. So to see them get swept in the first round by the Jets was something that not a lot of hockey fans saw coming at all. And similar to the idea that the Habs were going to make it to the finals, no one could have predicted that. But yeah, no, as you were saying, the sports is just one big community of people coming together and sharing something that they just love, right? So, and I think in a sense that relates to what we do, to the journalism idea of like people come together to report on things because they care about getting the news out to other people and helping people. Because I don't know about you, but when I went into the program, my idea was I want to do this because I want to spread the word of people who don't have their voices heard on a regular basis. And I think as a journalist, that's one of our primary primary jobs, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's been really powerful for me to feel like I'm part of this community. And coming from Toronto, where it's a really, really big city, it's hard sometimes to feel that sense of belonging. And I know that sounds kind of strange, like it's the city that I grew up in, but I still sometimes in Toronto feel disconnected. Like, one part of the city is very different from another. And I grew up in Scarborough where, you have people from all parts of the world and people who have different understandings of that world. And, being able to have that community in Scarborough for me was really helpful. So actually, in school, in general, I gravitated towards places where I could find community. So I gravitated towards just like having small friend groups or in high school, going to a program that was a little bit smaller because it gave me that sense of community. Same with university and same with J school. Like, when we were at Seneca, it's like we were all in these little groups. We didn't have lectures of 100 people. And for me, that was really important because in the end, you find yourself, you find your place when you're in that community. And so coming to Winnipeg, it's a small city. Like it's big. It's definitely a city. And I think people sort of pass over Winnipeg, because like Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, like flyover country, right? And I think Winnipeg has so much value, and it is a community, right? Like people here are really nice, and people are very helpful, and like I said, they just get behind each other. And there's the issues as well. Like we can talk about the things that aren't so great about Winnipeg, but I prefer to look at it like, oh, this is a place where people really get to know each other, and like no matter where they're from, they kind of get together. And for me, being able to put myself in that community right off the bat was really important because I've lived in places all over the world, right? But it doesn't you can't feel like home unless you're really part of a group of people. And so being a journalist, I was finding myself in that position of reaching out to people and forcing myself almost into the community, because you can't tell someone's story unauthentically. People can tell right away, if you're not invested in their cause, if you're not invested in what's actually happening. And so it's been a roller coaster of a year for me because I've been such a part of the community. I felt the pain when, we were having PCHs overwhelmed, with COVID. I felt the pain when teachers and school staff were not getting the help that they needed during COVID. Or, when I told you, like, a homicide happens and it shakes the community. These are things you feel as a journalist, and I think that's what actually makes you more capable of telling the story, because in the end you actually understand where people are coming from, and that's not that's not going to make you biased all of a sudden because you start to feel for them. I think for me it actually makes me stay focused, because in the end I'm like, well, I have a job to do. Like, people need to understand what's going on, and like, we got to just tell them straight what happened. Like, and it's hard because that really does an emotional toll on you, but that's the job where you go and you try to find people who don't have an outlet to express what they're feeling, or who won't be able to get the word out about something that's important to them, and you kind of give them that platform and you give them that space. And then on top of that, you're able to, because sometimes people, they have so much to say, and like, I know right now I'm being rambling on, but like,
no, that's fine.
People have so much to say. You gotta like keep it in a, this is the other part of the job, you gotta keep it in like a format, right? And just present it in a way that other people are gonna want to take it and like, oh, I understand that. Okay, I get what's happening, right? Because that's how the word spreads, and then the community builds, because they understand it. They're not, going through this convoluted route of trying to like look at someone else's shoes. It's like, okay, here's the information, I can have it and like take it and understand it in my own way.
Yeah, because to that point, the idea that in school, we learned that our things had to be so short and concise, that we had to get our point across and make it so that if someone who just didn't, like you were saying, didn't know anything about the topic or whatever, could just watch a 2-minute video and at the end of it kind of understand what you're talking about. That's the whole job. And for me, coming from U of T, where I was writing like these long essays trying to outline things, and then to come into the journalism program and then to be like, yeah, so you have to cut that down to like a couple sentences now. And
it's really hard.
It's super hard. And what do you feel that that we learned at Seneca that is translated over into what you're doing now in like the real world journalism?
Well, everything at Seneca has translated in some sort of way. And for me, I also came from a university program, so very similar situation where you're writing these long essays, you're really taking your time to dive deep into a subject. But because the world moves so fast and we are on a 24/7 news cycle, and I could go on and tell you that sometimes it's frustrating because you want to tell more, but because you only have so much time and so much of a person's attention, it is important to learn to write concise and to be clear. And I'm still not that great at it. I'm a talker. I honestly, sometimes I do interviews that are like 10-15 minutes long, and I wish I could show you the whole thing. Sometimes I do interviews that are 5 minutes. It just depends on the other person who's talking as well, and then what kind of conversation that we have, because at the end of the day, they're all conversations, right? And I hate when interviews are just so like choppy, and you're like, okay, next question. But like, that's another thing. Interview skills, that's something that I learned at Seneca that for me was really important, because I think we tend to think that like, oh, here's a list of questions that I need to ask, but sometimes you actually just have to listen. Like, yeah, you have an idea of what you're gonna ask the person, but like if they say something that like is so important, you want to either stick to that point or get back to that, or just kind of try to get where they're coming from, because that's the heart of the story, right? And like for me, even when I do those 10-15 minute interviews and I have to cut it down to like 30-second clips for them, I at least understand the heart of what they're trying to say, and that for me is the important part of telling the story, because then it comes across as like, oh, you understand their emotion, like I can write into that. And of course, the hands-on skills like using a camera, being able to do a live hit, for example, and being able to actually edit. Those are things that are really important in this job in particular because you do everything. Like it's so crazy when I came in on the first day, I knew that, right? But it's so much harder when you actually think about doing that on a regular basis, and you're doing that in 9 hours, right? So when you think about it, sometimes you go in with an idea, you don't even have an interview lined up, you have an hour to find the person, you do the interview, you film your stand-up, you film your B-roll, and then you actually put it all together. And then at the end of the show, or sorry, at the end of the day, you host the show too. So like, it can be a whirlwind. Some days are wild and crazy. And then you post to the internet as well. So like you also have to know how to use websites and stuff to a varying degree. But like all of the things we learned in Seneca are useful. But I would say the thing that was the most important is just learning how to tell a story. And I know that sounds simple, beginning, middle, end, and like you have the rise and the drama and whatnot. But it's like really you are responsible with people's words and their emotions. And for me, that weighs really heavily on me. When I first started at this job, I came home and I would think like, did I do that story justice? Like, it took a while, and it took a couple instances of people messaging me back after the story was done. And they were saying like, hey, you did a really great job. It took a while for me to really feel like I knew what I was doing. But once I was getting the feedback of like, thank you for telling my story. Like you really captured what I was trying to say, or like, thank you for saying that. Like you really made us feel special. And like, that's what's important to me, that the person feels their story was told efficiently and effectively.
Because I remember when we had our internship at CBC at the beginning of the pandemic, I was assigned to right away to go into getting a guest, writing a script for them, recording it, or like going to greet the person or whatever. And doing that in school and then going into the real world and doing it they're similar, but like you're saying, they're different also at the same time. Because you're always, like you said also, you're concerned about, are you covering the person's story properly? And I think that's something that I think we both did pretty well in school. We both we got a lot of the stories covered properly. And I have to say, in my third semester of Seneca College journalism, if it wasn't for you, none of my assignments would have gotten done properly. Because
really?
you were literally the subject in every single one of my classes. The interview, something had to do with you in every single one of my stories.
It's, as much as I love being behind the camera and being able to tell the story, I do enjoy being an interviewee. I enjoy doing this. I enjoy talking about things. I think that's what got me into this field in the first place. But I like to have conversations, and I think for me, I like to see the world and to experience different things, and to not be able to express it and talk about it would, in my mind, be a shame. So I'm glad I was able to help you. Obviously, I know I helped you with my cadet assignment in particular, because, or with me and the cadets and you doing the assignment. But I think that was such a big part of my world at the time that it was so easy to talk about. And like, I think at the end of the day, like, if you love something, like you do everything you can to kind of make it sound good and to talk about it well. So yeah, in that sense, like, I'm glad I was helping you, but I think you also helped me to just be able to express that and to be able to put that out there.
Yeah, it was weird because we didn't know each other I think until the third semester, because we didn't have many classes together up until then. And then we met at TIFF.
Right.
We met on the subway at TIFF.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah. Like, I think that's the best thing about school, right? Where you feel like I told you, like, I always gravitated towards schools that had smaller communities, but like you feel
Hmm.
like you know everyone, but then when you find out that you don't, it's almost like you're like, oh my gosh, I need to find out like who these people are and like, oh, what what are they interested in? Like they're there, but like I don't know them. And so it's really great with the people at Seneca because I feel like still connected to the school even though it's been a while now. And people who are there who are finishing off this year and asking me like, hey, what is it like in the real world? What is it like to work at this station? And people have actually gotten jobs at City News who have reached out to me. And I'm not saying that I like got them the job, but like I was able to give them some advice, which to me was really helpful because that means that our company not only benefits from having someone that's really passionate about it and I know, went to a similar education process as I did and will do well, but also just like being able to give back in a sense, right? Like for me, it just means a lot to be able to help people.
Yeah, no. Cause I remember I met you briefly on the subway, and then we just talked throughout all of TIFF. And because before that, I just knew you as Pandora and Sue's friend. That's it. You were just in that little friend group, and that was it. I had my friend group and everything, and then when I met you, I realized we had a lot in common. We were both that sort of hardworking, determined, wanting to get the story out properly sort of person. And I
Yeah.
saw that not only um, through just getting to know you, but also in like the work that you did because at school you were constantly running around doing something because you were doing school at Glendon also, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I was
you were
all
constantly
over.
running around doing stuff, somehow getting all these
Mhm.
assignments done on time. Like I mean, okay, we yeah,
I
we
can't
won't we
remember.
won't talk about everything that didn't get done on time, but um
Yeah.
that's just the nature of it. But
I'm pretty sure I did most. It's the part of the industry too that for me again it's a little bit frustrating because you want to spend more time on things,
yeah,
you want to make it perfect, but you do have a time limit and like it is important to get it into the show at a certain time. So I've learned, where to make things faster and like how to cut down and just like be a little bit more concise about how I write and like sometimes you just you have so many things you want to add but like it's not necessarily relevant. Like it might have been a good part of your conversation but it's not relevant. Then you just gotta leave it. And then I was all over at school because I'm just like a very type A person where I'm like okay I'm trying to do a lot of things, trying to get them done. And for me like it was really positive to actually be running around because it gave me a sense of purpose
yeah.
and like we can talk about like how the past year has been because it's been rather different. But I mean, definitely in school, that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah. Now, what would you say? Going just sticking with school, what would you say was one of your favorite classes that you think you've benefited from the most? I mean, obviously, all of them, like you said, have crossed over into the real world. But was there one particular class that really helped you as a video journalist?
Well, there were definitely bits and pieces of each class that were helpful. I think picking just one, uh, definitely the TV like in studio classes because that's the environment that I find myself in.
Mm.
I'm pretty much in the studio most of my shift and the actual like outside part where I go and I interview people or I go and I film things. I mean, those were also really helpful. Like the video classes and the editing classes, those were the skills that I needed. And that's why I went into this program. But for sure, the TV environment is what was really helpful for me. So I would say those were the main classes that solidified like the skill set that I needed. I think I don't know. It's really hard because I could give you a positive thing about each class. Like I could remember specific classes where we were talking a little bit more about the actual structure of the story, which is really helpful. And every station's going to have different structures for their stories. Like at City, we do a little bit longer of our stories. Some places it's a minute and a half, and that's it. You're done. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, like all the skills are really useful. And I know that doesn't actually really answer your question, but like if I had to pick just one, probably the TV classes, because the
Yeah.
writing skills, those were the ones that come into play a lot. And the terms, obviously, like VOSA and like, package, or we used ENGs, but like ENG is actually the term for like a camera person. Anyway, so yeah, you learn a lot of the lingo in those classes, which is really helpful. And then the speaking when you're in front of the prompter and when you're, doing all the things in the control room, like those are things that kind of that's what shocks your system when you first get into it, because the camera skills, you already know them. Once you do
Hmm.
it, it's like, okay, you're good. But that's the stuff that's like, oh, whoa, I'm in TV now. Like,
Yeah, it just comes out and it's like, oh, it's the real deal. It's not like you can just go into the other room and it's like, oh, it's an assignment. I can just do it over or something. It's like the real
right, yeah,
deal in a real TV situation. I think for
yeah.
for me the idea of the radio was always my favorite, which is why I've sort of gravitated more to like the podcast that I did with Max and Emma last year. This one that I just wanted to start up again because
Mm-hmm.
right now I'm still trying to find something to do. The pandemic is not helping, but it is what it is. So I thought, why not just try to get back into keeping these sort of like interview skills going and try to just keep up what I had going before. So I think radio for
Yeah,
me was a
exactly.
lot of fun. I loved the video stuff, but I think over the last year I realized TV is sort of not where I want to be. Um, and initially it's where everybody that sort of goes into that program wants to be, because you want to be, oh, I'm on TV, I'm doing this, that, the other thing on TV, you can see me here, there, and everywhere. It's like, I don't really need that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not for everybody. And I'm glad you're enjoying it. You've I could you've I've seen a lot of your news stories because I follow city Winnipeg. So yeah, I've seen a lot of them, and you're good. You're really good.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. It really means a lot when someone who has seen me grow compliments my work, or just tells me, hey, you're doing a good job, because I think people here, obviously, they haven't seen where I was in the past. And it's actually, I feel like I've really come far, but I don't think most people would know. But I used to have a list. I was like so nervous in front of people before. I used to have terrible stage fright, and just like over the years, that was when I was a lot younger. But like over the years, I built that confidence. I built the passion to actually talk in front of people. And so by the time I got
Hmm.
to high school, I think I had kind of curbed the fear of public speaking. But like it definitely still takes its toll sometimes being on TV. Like you're kind of always in the public eye, and there is some stuff that I don't love about it, but I think it feels rewarding, again, just doing the job where I'm able to bring people's stories to the forefront. And it's nice, yeah, to be able to kind of have your moment on TV, and like you're like sometimes I think about it, and I used to, when I was younger, and I'd be downtown and maybe they would need a streeter, which we know is like just a person on the street. They ask you what you think about something or how you feel about this event. And so every time I was a streeter, in high school or in like middle school, I was so excited. I was like, oh my god, I'm on TV. I'm like on TV for like 5-10 seconds. It's like now I'm
Hmm.
on TV for like more than 5-10 seconds a day, and it's almost like, obviously I feel like I'm just like leveled up over time, and like it feels like I'm at this point now where I'm like, okay, like it is exciting, but it's also my job, and like I just have to you kind of get over the stardust part of it, where it's like, oh, this is amazing. You realize that like this is a job, and like there's got to be like a purpose to my stand up. Like it's not just me standing there. Like me, like I hate, honestly, this is one of my pet peeves. Like I hate when stand ups don't like make sense in a pack, because you're seeing like the reporter and it's like, well, why are they there? It's like they need to be somewhere that's relevant to the story,
Yep.
or like you might as well
Yeah.
not do it. And so for me, I find it really important to if I'm going to be on camera, to be somewhere that makes sense. So sometimes it drives my shooter crazy because he's like, "Why do we have to go there?" I'm like, "Because it's relevant to the
Yeah.
story."
That was one
But
of the biggest pains that we had to deal with at school, making our bridges and
mm-hmm,
stand-ups relevant with like the background of what we want to talk about, because
yeah,
we'd have to travel to here, there, and everywhere just to get a proper shot. And
yeah,
90% of the class just didn't do it. They just stood outside the school and was like, "Yeah, here we are."
yeah.
It
That's the thing.
and
You can't
you
have.
get dock marks for that, but at the end of the day, it's just um, if you I agree, if you want a story done right, you have to be in a setting where it makes sense. Like talking about
Yeah,
like a transit system, but standing in front of like a school just doesn't make sense
yeah,
at all.
yeah.
So it's all about continuity and making sure that the story lines up.
Yeah, and I'm big on that, the continuity thing. And like these are things that on my day to day are kind of my little battles, because sometimes you have to you have to choose what to do. And like there are days where I get frustrated if the B-roll doesn't match. And like this is just me being picky sometimes, where I'm like, I need the B-roll to match exactly when I'm saying it. Otherwise, in my mind, I'm like, why would I do it, right?
Yeah.
But not everyone is. And again, it's that balance of like, I got to get this thing in on time. And again, this is something that I'm still working on, but I really feel that that's something, if I can do it, like I'm gonna match the B-roll, right? And at this point now, I I like to plan my story like in my head. And so there are days when I still don't have everything that I want in there, but if I can, like, and I know that it's going to be in the story, I try to film for it. Like, I'll be like, okay, I need a story, I need a picture of this bus, or I need a picture of this specific part of the building because that's what I'm going to be talking about, right? Like, I think you kind of have to. This is part of the process, and this is one of the things that I learned in one of those classes where you have like a checklist almost of like, okay, what do I need to get done when I'm on the scene so I don't have to go back and get it. And I have gone back to places where I'm like, no, you know what, this isn't going to make sense. We need to go film this again.
Yeah.
And it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah, but it just comes with the nature of the job. I think the idea that being on TV is like this spectacle is one thing, but
Yeah,
it's also more more taxing than it looks, because you
absolutely.
constantly have to be concerned about your image. You're constantly going to be judged,
Yeah,
what like on what you look, because like for radio no one sees you, they just hear your voice. TV, they
yeah,
see who you are. They can properly, they judge you on your appearance, this, that, the other thing. So with that in mind, has there been any like anything that you've gotten from people, like
yeah.
any kind of comments?
Yeah, I'm really lucky in the sense that I think I haven't received the worst. And I have to acknowledge myself that I have quite a bit of appearance privilege, if you will. Like I'm quite skinny, I'm rather small, and these are things that no one, says anything about because that's kind of the expectation, which, I've seen other women in news who get comments on how big they are or if their breasts are showing. So like for me, those are not issues, and it's really frustrating to ever think they would be. I know I had a colleague who told me that once someone commented that she wasn't wearing lipstick, and so I sometimes in the back of my mind I think about these things, but I mean I generally wear makeup when I go into the studio anyway because of the lights, and like it's something that we learned in school as well, where
Yeah.
if you are underneath lights, it shows everything. So to
Yeah.
almost like look normal, you have to like put on makeup. But I mean, that's part of the job that I don't love sometimes because I'm sitting here like doing makeup for like 20 minutes, and I wear it all day. Sometimes by the end of the day, it's not even looking that great. But you just like you are always going to be conscious of it because that's the nature of the medium. Like you're on TV and you know that people can make comments. So I try to mitigate it as much as possible. The biggest issue I think I've actually had with the viewer comments is uh, in perhaps the way I say something. Like I know one time I mispronounced something, and I've had a couple instances where people were like, "Marie, that's not how you say it," and I'm like, "Oh, how do you say it?" Because in Manitoba, there's a specific pronunciation for some things. Like they have a culture of like mixed French and English, and sometimes the French words are anglicized. Because I studied French too, so like
Right.
my nature is to when I see a French word to say it the French way, but like sometimes they have anglicized English names here, and so those are things that like I didn't know how to pronounce initially, or things where like I might have said a word differently, and because I have a pretty, I guess, standard, I would say standard North American accent, but I'm from a city and I also grew up in Scarborough, so there's a little bit of slang there, and like those are things I kind of have to check every once in a while. Those are the comments I've received maybe the most of like, oh, but I tend to try to curb it where I can, like in what I wear. We've had people comment on what people wear at our station, and it's not usually, directed at me because I like to dress, for lack of a better word, fancy. Like I've always known that that's kind of what you have to do when you're on TV, especially as a reporter, because that's how, if you want to portray yourself, like that's how I want to portray myself. But I know that some of the guys at our station have had issues before with people commenting on what they wear, because people who watch news, especially TV news, the audience is a little bit older, and so the mindset with in terms of clothing, um, and with appearance in general is a little bit older as well. But yeah, I haven't been like too. Actually, there have been issues with people commenting if I wear a mask, but those are people who are like anti-maskers or
Yeah.
who have issues with the mask in general. So those I don't take too much to heart. But yeah, it can be a little frustrating because at the end of the day, you're like, well, why don't you just pay attention to like what I'm talking about, right? That's what I feel the most conscious about. Where I'm like, I just want people to pay attention to like the story, and if they're too distracted by what I do, like then I don't want to take away from that. I want to be able to add to that, right? So even with what I do in my stand-ups, I'm very conscious of like, okay, it has to match, but it also has to be creative. And so, it depends on the story, it depends on what kind of balance you strike, but that's probably where I feel the most aware, just like of how I look and how I present myself.
Because I remember you were the only one that was excited when we had to do weather in class. Every time that we had to do
Yeah.
it, you were just on the ball, just running outside, and
Yeah,
no one else wanted to do it because we had to talk with all these
I think
scientific terms.
well, I mean, I think what intimidates people in TV about weather, and like, so I know Bill said it at one point that weather people are the most talented because they're on the ball, right? Like they have
100%.
you're like looking at this, and it's really tough because you're like looking at the screen, or you're pointing out things on the screen here, but you can't actually see it because it's a green screen, and then you're looking at that screen to see where you're placed, and then you have to look at this screen in front of you because that's who you're talking to. So it's a lot of like movement,
Yeah.
and I still wish I could accomplish that because we don't have weather at City News in Winnipeg. But yeah, if I were to think about doing that in the future, it does excite me still, and I think it's still a possibility for me. We'll
Hey,
see.
I mean, if anyone should do it, it's gonna be you. So you know what? I'll wrap it up there with that. Marie, thank you for being on. It's always
Yeah,
a
of course.
pleasure to talk to you. I mean, we talk
Yeah,
pretty
you.
much all the time over Instagram, so but it's just nice
Yeah.
to chat in person, I guess, if you want to say.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for being on. If there's any like social
Having me.
media you want to shout out, people should follow
Sure.
you, or where to get your latest news updates from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if people want the actual news updates, they can follow City News WPG. That's Twitter and Instagram. But for me, you can follow me at Marie Gomez 63, and that is both Twitter and Instagram. I mean, I have a Facebook page, but it's not. I don't post on it too often. But
Yeah.
Instagram is probably where I post most of my like day to day, and then Twitter, of course, is like the newsier kind of updates. So yeah, I mean that's definitely how you can follow along with my life, or reach out. I do have an email as well for work if anyone wants to do a story. It's marie.gomez@rci.rogers.ca.
So again, thank you for being on, and yeah, we'll see you guys next time.